In more than 2,000 open heart surgeries, I have seen things that change how I think about food, about medicine, and about the advice that millions of people have been faithfully following for decades. 2,000 times, I have opened a chest, held a living heart in my hands, looked directly at arterial tissue that no cholesterol panel and no routine checkup will ever show you. And what I saw consistently, repeatedly across patients of every background and every dietary philosophy was damage that should not have been there. Damage in people who were doing everything right. People who read labels. People who chose the low-fat option. People who drank their morning juice and took their whole grain crackers and felt genuinely good about those choices. And that disconnect between what those people believed they were doing for their hearts and what I was actually finding on my operating table is what I want to talk about today. Because the story of heart disease after 60 is not the story most people have been told. It is not a story about butter and eggs and red meat. It is a story about something far more insidious, far more hidden, and in many ways far more fixable. It is a story about inflammation. And it begins not with the foods your doctor warned you about, but with the foods your doctor, your government, and the labels on your grocery shelves told you were safe. Let me take you back to where this all began, because the roots of this confusion go deep. In the early 1970s, a single influential piece of nutritional research began reshaping the entire Western approach to eating. The central claim was straightforward: dietary fat drives heart disease. Fat clogs arteries. Fat kills. The message spread through medical institutions and government health agencies with remarkable speed. Within years, nutrition guidelines were rewritten. The food industry pivoted overnight. Fat became the villain, and an entire generation of low-fat products flooded the market, all of them stamped with reassuring language about heart health and doctor approval and responsible eating. And people responded. They switched from butter to margarine. They replaced eggs with cereal. They bought everything labeled light, low-fat, and reduced fat because that is what they were told would protect them. And through all of it, decade after decade, heart disease remained the leading cause of death. The numbers did not improve the way the theory predicted they would. Something in the logic was fundamentally broken. Here is what we now understand, based on research that has accumulated steadily over the past 2 decades. The primary driver of cardiovascular damage is not dietary fat. It is chronic, low-grade inflammation happening inside the walls of your arteries. This inflammation builds quietly, silently, over years before any symptom appears, before any test catches it. It damages the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels. Your body, trying to repair that damage, sends materials to patch the injured areas. That patching material accumulates. It hardens. It narrows the channel through which blood must flow. And eventually, in a way that is never truly sudden, even when it appears sudden, the system fails. That is what I see on my operating table. Not the aftermath of too much butter. The aftermath of years of arterial inflammation that was never addressed because no one was looking for it in the right places. What drives that inflammation most aggressively? Refined carbohydrates, hidden sugars, ultra-processed foods. These are the compounds that spike insulin, flood the bloodstream with inflammatory signals, and erode the inner lining of your arteries more consistently than almost anything else you can eat. And the most disorienting part of this truth is that many of the foods delivering that damage every single day are the ones sitting in your kitchen right now, wearing a healthy label. Start with something found in nearly every refrigerator. Flavored, low-fat yogurt. The packaging is designed with extraordinary care. Bright fruit imagery. Words like probiotic, calcium-rich, light, and wholesome. The woman on the label is athletic and smiling. And millions of people reach for this product every morning feeling like they're doing something genuinely good for themselves. Here is what is actually inside. When manufacturers remove fat from yogurt, the flavor deteriorates sharply. The product becomes something no one would willingly eat. So they compensate. They add sugar, often a significant amount of it. A single standard container of flavored low-fat yogurt can carry as much added sugar as a typical candy bar, sometimes more. And after 60, when insulin sensitivity has declined and the pancreas no longer responds at the same speed it once did, that sugar does not pass through your system quickly. It spikes your blood glucose hard and keeps it elevated far longer than it would in a younger body. That repeated daily spike, consumed morning after morning while feeling virtuous about the choice, is one of the most consistent contributors to arterial inflammation I am aware of. The same principle applies to instant oatmeal. Plain oats are genuinely beneficial. The fiber content, the slow digestion, the mineral profile, these are real advantages. But the flavor packets from the supermarket shelf are a completely different product. The oats have been processed so extensively that they digest almost as rapidly as white bread. Add the 12 to 15 grams of sugar typically found in each serving, and you have something your body reads as barely distinguishable from a bowl of sweetened refined starch. The healthy breakfast becomes the morning insulin spike. Two simple substitutions fix both of these problems entirely. Plain Greek yogurt with fresh berries stirred in. Steel-cut oats cooked simply and topped with real fruit. The difference in what those alternatives do inside your arteries over months and years is not trivial. Now consider whole grain bread and crackers. These genuinely sound like a medical recommendation. And in principle, whole grains do offer real benefits. Fiber, minerals, a slower digestion curve. The problem is what happens to those theoretical benefits by the time a product reaches a supermarket shelf inside a sealed package. Turn the bag over. Look past the prominent whole wheat claim on the front and read the actual ingredient list. You will almost always find added sugars, sometimes high fructose corn syrup, and then something that deserves serious attention. Industrial seed oils, soybean oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, canola oil, processed at high temperatures during manufacturing and present in nearly every packaged baked good on the market. These oils do something very specific to your cardiovascular system. They dramatically shift the balance between two types of fatty acids in your body, omega-6 and omega-3. In a healthy metabolic environment, that ratio should sit at roughly 4-1. In someone eating a typical processed food diet regularly, that ratio climbs to 20-1 or beyond. Omega-6 fatty acids in that kind of excess are profoundly pro-inflammatory. They keep your immune system in a state of constant activation. And a cardiovascular system operating under that kind of persistent inflammatory load is aging faster than it should. I have seen patients with what appeared on paper to be exemplary diets, whole grain everything, minimal red meat, responsible choices at every turn, showing arterial inflammation markers consistent with someone decades older. When we traced their daily intake carefully, the common thread was these packaged products, consumed every single day in quantities that seemed entirely reasonable. Breakfast cereals carry the same burden. Even the brands that present themselves as responsible and nutritionally serious can contain more sugar per serving than a glazed pastry. The vitamins added back after processing do not undo the metabolic damage that the refined carbohydrates and industrial oils create with each serving. My personal rule when evaluating any packaged product is simple. If the ingredient list runs longer than 5 items, or if 3 of those items are things I cannot identify as actual food, I put it back on the shelf. Now let us talk about what you drink. For a great many people over 60, the morning begins with a glass of fruit juice. Orange juice most commonly. Natural, fresh, 100% real fruit, no added sugar. It sounds like the most innocent choice imaginable. Here is what actually happens when you drink it. Juice is fruit with the fiber surgically removed. And fiber is not incidental to fruit. It is the entire mechanism by which fruit delivers its sugar safely to your body. Fiber slows digestion. It controls the rate at which sugar enters your bloodstream, spreading that release over time. Without it, the sugar from 3 or 4 pieces of fruit arrives in your system all at once. Your insulin spikes hard. Your liver receives a flood it struggles to process efficiently. And that cycle, repeated every morning, quietly and steadily builds insulin resistance over months and years. Insulin resistance is massively underdiagnosed in people over 60, and it is a direct, well-established driver of arterial inflammation, elevated blood pressure, and cardiovascular risk. The solution is as simple as the problem. Eat the fruit. Do not drink it. Keep the fiber. That is where the safety mechanism lives. Diet sodas present a different kind of problem. The obvious objection to them: sugar content does not apply. They contain no sugar, no calories. That part is accurate. But multiple large-scale studies, including data linked to major cardiology research networks, have found consistent associations between regular diet soda consumption and elevated stroke risk and cardiovascular disease. The proposed pathway involves disruption of the gut microbiome and changes in how the brain manages hunger signals and insulin response, a cascade that ultimately raises cardiovascular risk through a route that has nothing to do with blood sugar directly. After 60, your gut microbiome is already more susceptible to disruption than it was 2 decades ago. Regular artificial sweetener consumption is not, by the available evidence, a neutral act. Sparkling water with a slice of citrus is not a consolation prize. It is a straightforward improvement, and the inflammatory marker data suggests your arteries will register that difference within weeks of making the switch. Margarine occupies a particularly significant place in this conversation because the harm it caused was not the result of negligence or ignorance. It was the result of people genuinely trying to do the right thing. For decades, margarine was positioned as the responsible alternative to butter. Cardiologists endorsed it. Government guidelines recommended it. Entire generations made the switch sincerely, faithfully, because they were told it would protect their hearts. The problem was trans fats, hydrogenated oils that turn out to cause profound cardiovascular damage. By the early 2000s, the evidence was overwhelming enough that trans fats were banned or severely restricted across much of the world. A genuine and important public health achievement. But manufacturers then had to reformulate their products. They replaced hydrogenated oils with chemically modified alternatives. And the honest truth about those alternatives is that the long-term safety data is still being assembled. Early research raises real concerns about their effects on insulin function and cholesterol particle behavior. My position as a surgeon is straightforward. I would rather eat a fat that human beings have been consuming for thousands of years than one created in an industrial process 40 years ago. Grass-fed butter and cold-pressed olive oil have robust, long-term cardiovascular evidence behind them. Manufactured vegetable spreads simply do not. Frozen convenience meals and meal replacement products deserve more scrutiny than they typically receive, partly because the people who rely on them most are often the people whose circumstances make cooking most difficult. Busy schedules, living alone, limited energy. These products offer a genuine promise of convenience combined with nutrition, and the packaging delivers that promise convincingly. Vitamin content listed prominently. Protein and fiber claims on the front. The overall impression is of something a health-conscious person would choose. The ingredient list tells a different story. Maltodextrin, a highly processed starch that raises blood sugar more rapidly than regular table sugar. Corn syrup solids. Sodium in amounts that would alarm any cardiologist looking at the number in isolation. And a catalog of preservatives and stabilizers that bear no resemblance to anything that could be grown or raised. The concern here is not any single ingredient in isolation. It is the cumulative inflammatory load that builds from consuming these compounds across multiple meals, day after day. Large population studies have found a measurable increase in cardiovascular disease risk associated with each additional daily serving of ultra-processed food. After 60, your body's natural repair processes are slower. Damage accumulates faster than it clears. This is not a moral judgment. It is biology. And it means the daily inputs matter more now than they ever did before. The low-fat movement of the 1980s and 1990s deserves to be addressed directly because it was one of the most consequential and damaging nutritional experiments ever conducted at a population scale. Products flew off shelves. Low-fat cookies, low-fat salad dressings, low-fat versions of nearly everything. People believed they were protecting their health. They were following the most credible advice available. What happened inside those packages was consistent and predictable. Fat was removed. Taste and texture suffered. Manufacturers compensated by adding sugar, refined starch, and corn syrup. Low-fat peanut butter with added sweetener to replace the removed oil. Low-fat granola bars carrying more sugar than conventional candy. Low-fat frozen dinners built on a foundation of refined carbohydrates and sodium. The research that followed was unambiguous. Replacing dietary fat with refined carbohydrates and added sugar was not a neutral trade. It was a direct predictor of worse cardiovascular outcomes. The people following this advice most carefully and consistently were, in many documented cases, actively increasing their risk while believing they were reducing it. Fat does not make you fat. Fat does not clog arteries. These are outdated ideas that need to be permanently retired. What matters is the type of fat and the overall inflammatory character of the diet as a whole. That is what the current evidence actually supports. A full-fat plain yogurt with no added ingredients is categorically better for your cardiovascular system than a low-fat version loaded with sweeteners and modified starch. Every time, without exception, when you see the words low-fat on a package, treat it as a signal to read the rest of that label very carefully. In the overwhelming majority of cases, something more damaging has been substituted for what was removed. Now let me tell you what your arteries genuinely respond well to, because this part of the conversation matters just as much as everything I have covered so far. Eggs were demonized for decades, based on concerns about dietary cholesterol that the research has largely dismantled. For most people, eating eggs has minimal effect on blood cholesterol levels. 2 eggs in the morning provide high-quality protein, important nutrients for brain and vascular function, and sustained energy that does not produce the blood sugar spike a bowl of sweetened cereal would. That is a good breakfast. The evidence supports it clearly. Fatty fish, specifically salmon, mackerel, and sardines, are among the most powerful food-based cardiovascular interventions available without a prescription. The omega-3 fatty acids they contain actively reduce inflammation. They improve how flexibly arteries respond to changes in blood flow. They lower triglycerides and reduce clotting risk simultaneously. 2 to 3 servings per week is the evidence-based target, and reaching it consistently produces measurable improvements in cardiovascular markers over time. Leafy greens, spinach, arugula, kale, are rich in dietary nitrates that your body converts into nitric oxide, a compound that relaxes and widens blood vessel walls, reduces resistance, and lowers blood pressure naturally. This is one of the fastest dietary pathways to supporting vascular health, and it requires nothing more than making these vegetables a regular daily presence on your plate. Berries, particularly blueberries, are dense with polyphenol that directly protect the inner lining of your arteries. Multiple studies have documented measurable reductions in arterial inflammation markers within weeks of regular berry consumption. Weeks, not months. The biology responds that quickly when given the right inputs. And cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil is the cornerstone of the most cardiovascular protective dietary pattern identified in the entire history of nutritional science. Use it generously on vegetables and salads for moderate temperature cooking. It was never the enemy. The evidence for its protective effects on the cardiovascular system is among the most robust in the field. None of these foods are exotic. None of them require a specialist grocery store or a complicated preparation method. They are real foods, the kind that existed before the packaging industry invented health claims and before nutritional guidelines were written by committees whose conclusions the food industry had a financial interest in shaping. I want to say something clearly before we go any further, because it genuinely needs to be said. None of what I have described is your fault. You followed the advice you were given. You read the labels, you chose the low-fat options, you drank the juice, you trusted the guidelines because those are the guidelines. And those guidelines are wrong, not slightly imprecise. Fundamentally, demonstrably wrong for 50 years in ways that caused real harm to real people who were trying their hardest to take care of themselves. That is a systemic failure of nutritional science and public health policy. It is not a personal failing. But here is what consistently astonishes me, even after all these years. The human cardiovascular system is extraordinarily resilient. Even after decades of receiving the wrong inputs, it It responds to the right ones faster than almost any other tissue system in the body. I have patients in their late 60s and early 70s who made meaningful dietary changes and saw measurable improvements in inflammatory markers, arterial flexibility, and blood pressure within weeks. Not years. Weeks. The body wants to move toward health when the conditions allow it. It is designed to repair. The work is not starting over from zero. It is simply stopping the daily inputs that are working against the process and replacing them with inputs that support it. Your concrete starting point is this. Read every label, but read the back, not the front. The front is marketing. The ingredient list is information. Look specifically for added sugar in any of its many forms, industrial seed oils, ingredient lists longer than 5 items, and compounds you cannot identify as real food. If a product triggers 2 or more of those flags, leave it on the shelf. Then choose one ultra-processed product you currently eat regularly. Just one. Remove it for 30 days and replace it with a whole food equivalent. 1. Substitution. Research consistently shows that a single meaningful dietary change produces detectable improvements in blood markers within a month. You will notice the difference before any lab result confirms it. And stop fearing real food. Butter from quality sources. Eggs. Olive oil. Full-fat plain dairy. Fatty fish. These have never been your enemies. The fear of natural fat is a 50-year marketing narrative dressed up as medical advice. Your arteries respond differently to grass-fed butter than to a chemically modified vegetable spread, even when the calorie numbers look similar on paper. That biological difference is what determines your cardiovascular trajectory over time. What happens on the operating table is where damage gets repaired after it has already occurred. What happens in your kitchen every day is where that damage is either prevented or created. You have more direct, immediate influence over the long-term health of your heart through your daily food choices than through almost any other factor in your control. That is not encouragement for its own sake. That is what the data shows and what I have watched happen in real patients at 65, at 72, at ages when most people assume the trajectory is fixed. It is not fixed. The body does not consult your birth certificate before deciding whether to respond to the inputs you give it. It simply responds. And it is waiting right now for you to give it something worth responding to